They called it the Devil's Playground, a place so brutal, so forgotten by the world, that even the guards whispered warnings about it under their breath. Inmates who entered rarely came out whole, if they came out at all. And now, a 19-year-old kid named Reggie Cole was about to cross its gates for the first time. But what no one could have imagined was how this kid, thrown into the darkest pit of the American prison system, would end up rewriting his fate and shaking the entire institution from the inside. Reggie Cole's story didn't begin behind prison walls. It began on the sun-scorched streets of Los Angeles in the mid-80s. His family had moved there searching for a better life, but what they found was a neighborhood drowning in gang violence and crime. As the youngest of 4 siblings, Reggie watched the world around him change fast. His brother Kenny, just 15, was soon swallowed up by gang life, a decision that would cost him everything. One day, in broad daylight, rival gang members ambushed Kenny's crew. Gunfire erupted, and Kenny was killed right there on the street. Reggie was only 10 when it happened. The grief nearly destroyed their family. His father left. His older brother moved away. His sisters married and started their own lives. That left Reggie and his mother alone, clinging to each other in a house now filled with silence and memories. But grief has a way of warping young hearts. At first, Reggie tried to stay focused on school, trying to be the son his mother needed. But the streets had other plans. Kenny's old friends pulled him into their orbit. The allure of fast money, protection, and belonging became too strong to resist. One small compromise led to another, until by 16, Reggie was dealing weed, running with the local gangs, and barely recognizable from the boy he once was. Arrests came next, first for resisting police, then for weapons possession. Yet, it wasn't until 1995 that Reggie's life took its darkest turn. At just 19, he was arrested and convicted of murdering a man outside a notorious brothel. The trial was swift, the evidence shaky, but the verdict was life in prison. No parole, just life, inside one of the most violent correctional facilities in the nation, Calipatria State Prison. The ride to Calipatria felt endless. Shackled to a bus seat, dressed in bright orange, Reggie stared out at the endless desert that soon swallowed all signs of civilization. The prison emerged like a fortress from the sand, isolated, electrified fences buzzing ominously, watchtowers glaring down. This wasn't a place for rehabilitation, it was a warehouse for the damned. The moment Reggie stepped off the bus, a wave of stench hit him. Animal dung from the prison's livestock pens. It was as if the very air warned him to turn back. But there was no turning back now. He and the other new inmates were stripped, searched, issued scratchy prison uniforms, and marched to their cells. Reggie's new home was a concrete tomb, no windows, a steel door with a single slot, and a bunk shared with a stranger. His cellmate barely acknowledged him, which suited Reggie fine. In this place, trust could be fatal. It didn't take long to grasp the brutal laws of survival. Just days in, a group of inmates stormed his cell. They brutalized his cellmate as Reggie lay frozen in the top bunk, feigning sleep, knowing that one wrong move could make him the next target. The message was clear. Weakness wouldn't just invite violence, it would guarantee it. Determined not to be prey, Reggie began preparing. With nothing more than a toothbrush and a stone, he crafted his first weapon, a crude but deadly shiv. Each day in the yard, he observed the power dynamics. Every inmate belonged to a gang, and protection meant survival. But newcomers weren't welcomed so easily. You had to prove yourself first. One afternoon, while moving cautiously through the yard, Reggie's test came. A gang cornered him. Their leader, a hulking man, slammed him against the perimeter fence. All eyes turned. This was a public spectacle, a declaration of dominance. But in a flash, Reggie drove his sharpened toothbrush into the man's side. Not a killing blow, just enough to send a message. He wasn't easy prey. The gang backed off, whispers spread, and soon, an established crew called 49 invited him in. For the first time since entering hell, Reggie had allies. But even within this brutal order, one man ruled them all. Eddie Clark, known by all as El Diablo. Towering, ruthless, and terrifying, El Diablo ran Calipatria like a personal empire. Drugs, contraband, influence, he controlled it all. Even the guards deferred to him, granting him privileges in a fragile attempt to keep the peace. But peace under El Diablo's reign was like a razor's edge. One wrong glance could mean death. Reggie learned quickly to avoid El Diablo's attention. For 4 long years, he focused on survival, on building his body into a weapon and staying under the radar. The boy who entered the prison, frail and uncertain, had transformed into a hardened, muscular young man. Yet danger was never far. El Diablo's behavior grew increasingly unstable. Alcohol and violence twisted him further. Not even his closest followers were safe. Then came the day that changed everything. It began with a simple prank. Someone threw a pebble at a guard. The response was immediate. Sirens blared. All inmates were forced face down on the yard for a sweep. During the search, guards discovered a handmade knife on the ground. Unbeknownst to them, it belonged to El Diablo's right-hand man. The guards demanded to know who owned it. Silence followed. No one dared speak. Then El Diablo lifted his head, scanning the crowd. His eyes locked onto Reggie, an outsider, an easy scapegoat. Pointing directly at him, El Diablo snarled, "It's his." In that moment, Reggie's entire life hung in the balance. Accepting the false accusation would destroy his standing and mark him as weak, a future victim. But to defy El Diablo, that was unthinkable. And yet, with a calm voice that shocked everyone, including the guards, Reggie replied, "No, it's not mine." A collective gasp swept the yard. Defying El Diablo publicly was tantamount to suicide. Reggie knew what he had done. From that moment forward, he became a marked man. For weeks, Reggie lived in a constant state of alert. He slept lightly, stayed close to guards in the yard, and avoided isolated areas. He knew retaliation was coming. It was only a matter of when. And then, one cold morning, it did. Reggie was walking the yard when he saw El Diablo approaching, not with stealth but with grim purpose. Without a word, El Diablo grabbed Reggie's shoulder and drove a blade into his side. Not a fatal wound, but a promise of worse to come. Blood seeped through Reggie's shirt as El Diablo walked away, smug and unchallenged. Around them, the yard remained eerily indifferent. No inmate or guard dared intervene, but Reggie was done being a hunted man. Later that day, during routine searches at the yard gate, El Diablo stood at the front of the line, unaware of what was coming. Reggie, clutching his wound, waited 3 spots behind him. In his pocket, a hidden blade he had retrieved just minutes before. As El Diablo smirked back at him during the search, the decision crystallized in Reggie's mind. In a blur of motion, he broke from the line and drove the knife into El Diablo's throat. Chaos erupted. El Diablo staggered, eyes wide with shock, clutching his neck as blood poured out. Guards froze. Inmates watched in stunned silence. And as the king of Calipatria collapsed, Reggie calmly laid face down, hands over his head, shouting, "I know what I did!" The devil of Calipatria was dead. But Reggie's battle was far from over. Solitary confinement awaited him. A new murder charge loomed. The walls of solitary were thicker than concrete. They pressed in on the mind as much as on the body. And for Reggie Cole, who now sat alone in a 6-by-9-foot box, the silence was suffocating. The stabbing of El Diablo had sent shockwaves through Calipatria. The prison was locked down. Tensions simmered just beneath the surface. But while the rest of the inmates buzzed with whispered legends about the man who had killed the devil himself, Reggie faced an even more terrifying truth. He might not survive long enough to see daylight again. A second murder charge now hung over him. His sentence was already life, but this This could easily lead to death row. The evidence was irrefutable. Witnesses, everyone saw it. A motive, clear as day. Reggie had made his choice when he plunged that blade into El Diablo's throat, and there was no walking it back. At first he spiraled, alone in the darkness, with no one to talk to, no windows, and 23 hours a day locked inside. The days blurred together. Food trays slid through a slot in the door. Voices came muffled through concrete. But there was one tiny spark left inside Reggie, the same instinct that had made him stand his ground in the yard: survival. Then came the court papers. The state had assigned a list of public defenders he could choose from. Reggie stared at the list with numb detachment. It didn't matter, he thought. The outcome was already written. So he picked a name at random: Christopher Bort. Another lawyer, another doomed case. Or so he believed, but sometimes fate has its own plans. Christopher Bort was no ordinary defense attorney. Though young, he had a reputation for obsession, for chasing down details no one else would bother with. And when he read through Reggie's file, something didn't add up. Not with the El Diablo killing. That was open and shut. No, it was Reggie's original conviction, the murder that had landed him in Calipatria in the first place. Why had this 19-year-old kid with no history of violent crime suddenly been convicted of shooting a man in cold blood? The case file was thin, too thin, and as Bort dug deeper, cracks began to appear. Reggie had been convicted of killing a 29-year-old man named Felipe Gonzalez in front of a brothel back in 1995. The star witness? The brothel manager, John Jones. According to Jones, he had watched the entire scene unfold from a second-story window. 3 gang members demanding money from Gonzalez, who didn't speak English, then gunning him down when he failed to comply. Jones's testimony claimed that one of the attackers had been limping, shot during the attack. Conveniently, Reggie had an old gunshot scar on his leg. That had been enough for the detective, a rookie on her first major case, to zero in on him. No fingerprints, no DNA, no corroborating witnesses, just one shaky account from a man who, Bort soon discovered, had plenty of reasons to lie. First, there was the forensic evidence. Bort brought in independent experts to re-examine the case. The angle of the bullet wounds in Gonzalez's body didn't match a street-level shooting. The trajectory indicated the shots had come from above, likely from a second-story window. The same window where Jones had claimed to be an innocent observer. Then there was the old gunshot wound. Medical records showed that Reggie had been shot in the leg when he was 13 years old, years before the murder of Gonzalez. The scar had nothing to do with the crime. Piece by piece, Bort reconstructed what likely happened. Under pressure to close her first big case, the rookie detective had seized on an easy target, a known gang member with a convenient old injury. And Jones, his brothel was illegal. Cooperating with police and giving them a suspect had earned him leniency, a deal that kept his business running under the radar. As the pieces fell into place, Bort filed motion after motion, demanding a retrial. It took 3 long years, years in which Reggie remained trapped in solitary, serving time not only for killing El Diablo, but for a crime he never committed. But the tide was finally turning. In court, Bort laid out the damning evidence: the bullet angles, the old wound, the retracted testimony from Jones, who now admitted he had told police what they wanted to hear. Witnesses came forward to confirm that Reggie hadn't been limping at the time of his arrest. And with every new revelation, the original case unraveled. Finally, after more than a decade behind bars, the judge ruled that Reggie's first conviction was overturned. He had been innocent all along, but there was still the matter of El Diablo. The district attorney, under public pressure, chose to pursue second-degree murder rather than first. Bort argued that the killing had been in self-defense, or at least in a desperate bid for survival. The prison environment had left Reggie with no choice. The court agreed to reduce the charge. The sentence? 10 years in solitary confinement, a brutal punishment, but less than what could have been. And by the time the ruling was handed down, Reggie had already served 8 of those years. Only 2 remained. Those last 2 years were some of the hardest. Solitary confinement does things to a person. Time stretches and warps. The mind begins to play tricks. But through it all, Reggie clung to one truth. He was finally being seen. The truth of his wrongful conviction had come to light. And soon, finally, he would be free. In 2009, after 16 years behind bars, 10 of them in solitary, Reggie Cole walked out of Calipatria a free man. The sun felt strange on his skin. The world had changed. The city looked different. He was different. But he was alive. Freedom, however, wasn't the end of the battle. Reggie sued the city of Los Angeles for wrongful conviction. The fight took years, dragging through the courts, reopening old wounds. But in 2017, justice, at least in part, was served. The city agreed to pay Reggie $5.2 million in compensation. No amount of money could erase what he'd endured, the stolen years, the trauma, the nights in darkness. But it gave him a chance, a second life, a future. And yet even as he rebuilt his world piece by fragile piece, Reggie couldn't shake the ghosts of those 16 years. No matter how bright the California sun seemed now, a part of him still lived in the shadows of Calipatria's cold, windowless cells. He could feel it in the way he scanned every room instinctively, how a slammed door made his heart race, how sleep still came in fitful bursts. Freedom was a gift, yes, but it came with its own burden, the memories he couldn't leave behind. There were nights when the past would bleed into the present. Reggie would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, convinced for a moment that the steel door was about to slam shut again. He'd lie there in his new apartment, staring at the ceiling, the weight of years pressing down. But it wasn't just trauma that haunted him. It was the thought of others, men he'd left behind in Calipatria, men who were innocent, men who were trapped. The system that had chewed him up and spit him out was still grinding away, and Reggie knew better than anyone that not every wrong conviction had a lawyer like Christopher Bort digging into the truth. There were others still locked in the devil's playground, unseen and unheard. And the question that gnawed at him most was simple. Could he do something about it? At first, Reggie thought he would move on quietly, live a life of peace, use the settlement to build a future, maybe start a business, travel, leave it all behind. But each time he tried, the pull of responsibility was stronger. He'd gone through hell and come out alive for a reason. Maybe that reason wasn't just to live free. Maybe it was to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. So he began to speak, quietly at first. A podcast interview here, a local panel discussion there. His story spread, resonating with people who had never imagined how broken the system could be. Reporters began calling. Documentarians knocked on his door. And with each retelling, Reggie found a new kind of strength. Not the strength of fists or muscle, but of voice. The more he spoke, the clearer his mission became. He began partnering with advocacy groups, working to expose wrongful convictions. He met exonerees, men and women who, like him, had spent years or decades behind bars for crimes they hadn't committed. Their stories mirrored his own, each one another cut from the same flawed cloth of injustice. Through these connections, Reggie learned just how deep the problem ran. Faulty eyewitness testimony, coerced confessions, corrupt deals, overworked public defenders, and, perhaps most damning, the sheer indifference of a system designed more to punish than to seek truth. The same rookie detective who had once railroaded him had continued her career unscathed. How many others had fallen under her watch? Fueled by anger and purpose, Reggie began pushing harder. He established a foundation, using part of his settlement money, aimed at funding independent investigations into questionable convictions. He hired legal researchers, connected with journalists, and started to shine light into corners long left dark. And then, the first case landed on his desk. A young man named Derek Mason, barely 20, locked up in Calipatria for a murder eerily similar to Reggie's own case. No physical evidence, a single witness with ties to a gang. A confession obtained after hours of interrogation with no lawyer present. The parallels were chilling. Reggie couldn't look away. With his team, he dug in, visiting Derek's family, scouring court transcripts, interviewing anyone who would talk. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became. Derek was innocent, but no one in the system seemed to care. Reggie faced a choice. He could keep playing it safe, stay in the background, fund the investigation quietly, or he could step into the spotlight, put his own name and story on the line, and fight for Derek openly. The risk was real. Old enemies from his prison days still had reach. Public scrutiny could turn ugly fast. But Reggie knew if he stayed silent, he'd be betraying every lesson those 16 years had carved into him, so he spoke out. A viral news segment aired Reggie's interview, highlighting Derek's case and Reggie's personal fight to expose the injustice. The response was immediate and massive. Social media caught fire. Advocacy groups rallied. The DA's office, caught off guard, was forced to review the case. The pressure mounted. A new forensic expert brought in by Reggie's team debunked key pieces of the original evidence. The supposed eyewitness recanted, and within months, the case was reopened. In the courtroom, as Derek's new hearing unfolded, Reggie sat in the gallery, watching the system that had once nearly destroyed him, now being forced to reckon with its own sins. When the judge finally ruled to overturn Derek's conviction, Reggie felt something shift, not just in the room, but in himself. This was why he'd survived. This was what the fight had been for. But victories like Derek's were rare. For every case that saw the light, countless others remained buried in the dark. Reggie knew the fight was far from over, yet with each small win, momentum built. His foundation grew. More exonerees joined the cause. Lawyers, journalists, and even a few reform-minded officials began to take notice. Behind the scenes, though, old dangers still lurked. Reggie knew that exposing corruption came with risks, real ones. The same networks of influence and silence that had protected men like El Diablo for years didn't just vanish when one kingpin fell. They evolved, shifted, and some of those unseen forces still had long arms reaching both inside and outside the prison walls. He began noticing things. Strange cars parked too long outside his apartment, anonymous emails warning him to back off. A threatening letter slid under his office door late one night. Some of it was amateur intimidation, he figured, people trying to scare him off the work he was doing. But other signs were more serious. People inside the system didn't want Calipatria's deepest secrets dragged into the light. It was Christopher Bort who finally brought the new pieces together. Over late-night coffees and stacks of old court documents, they pieced through connections that pointed to something far larger than a few bad convictions. Evidence suggested a pattern. Certain guards, gang leaders, and corrupt officials had been working in tandem for years, planting evidence, coercing confessions, silencing troublesome inmates. And it hadn't stopped with El Diablo's death. Some of those same players still operated in the shadows of Calipatria. Worse, their web extended into other facilities, other counties. What Reggie and Bort had stumbled onto was systemic and explosive. But to prove it, they needed more than rumors and whispers. They needed hard evidence. Reggie made a decision. He would go back, not as a prisoner this time, but as an advocate. Through his growing network, he arranged meetings with men still locked inside Calipatria, men who had stories, evidence, names. Some were too terrified to talk. Others had been waiting years for someone on the outside to listen. What Reggie heard chilled him. One inmate, a former lieutenant under El Diablo, revealed that several of the false charges against prisoners, including Reggie's own first case, had been orchestrated with the cooperation of a small group of guards desperate to maintain order by any means necessary. When things got too volatile, or when a gang needed to make an example, certain inmates were set up, weapons planted, fights staged, testimonies coerced. It had been an unspoken arrangement, peace through fear. But innocent men had paid the price. Each new testimony brought more clarity and more danger. Word spread fast that Reggie was digging. The warnings escalated. His car tires slashed, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, messages left on advocacy forums hinting that some people wanted him back where he belonged. But Reggie wouldn't stop. He and Bort compiled their findings into a detailed report and presented it to a coalition of reform-minded lawmakers and journalists. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some officials wanted to launch an investigation. Others dismissed the claims, calling them old ghosts from a past best left buried. But then a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A retired Calipatria guard, racked with guilt after decades of silence, reached out to Reggie anonymously. They met in a secluded park. The man, grey-haired, eyes haunted, confirmed everything. He'd witnessed setups firsthand, had been ordered to falsify reports, had seen prisoners beaten or disappeared into solitary for daring to speak out. "I should have come forward years ago," the man whispered, voice trembling. "But the system, it eats you alive, just like it did to you." Armed with this testimony, Reggie and Bort had what they needed to push for a formal inquiry. The press latched onto the story. Headlines blared, "Calipatria cover-up? Whistleblowers expose decades of corruption." The state had no choice but to open an investigation. But Reggie knew better than to celebrate too soon. Powerful people still wanted this buried. And as the investigation began, new threats surfaced, this time closer to home. His mother's house was vandalized, his office broken into. Friends warned him to lay low. Still, he pressed on. He spoke at rallies, testified before state committees, met with families of prisoners still trapped by false convictions. The movement was growing, but the fight was taking a toll. Reggie found himself sleeping less, eating on the run, haunted by the faces of those he couldn't yet save. And then the unthinkable happened. One night, after a long day of meetings, Reggie returned to his apartment to find the door ajar. Inside, drawers were ransacked. His laptop was gone, files torn apart, and on the mirror scrawled in red marker, "Stop digging." For a moment, fear threatened to consume him. The message was clear: back off or face the consequences. But standing there, fists clenched, heart racing, Reggie made a vow: he would not be silenced. Not now, not ever. He increased security, moved to a safer location, doubled down on protecting the whistleblowers and inmates coming forward. And through it all, the investigation pressed forward, uncovering more damning evidence by the week. Reggie's name was now known statewide, a symbol of both hope and defiance. And though the fight was far from over, momentum was on their side. But in the shadows of Calipatria, those who had thrived in corruption weren't done yet. New alliances were forming, old enemies were stirring, and whispers hinted that a final reckoning was coming, not just for Reggie, but for the entire system that had built its empire on the backs of the innocent. As Reggie stood on the steps of the state courthouse, preparing to speak to a crowd of supporters and press, a single thought burned in his mind. The devil's playground wasn't done with him yet, and this time, the fight was personal.